Hello and welcome to the 73rd episode of Jazzology presented by Savage Content. I'm your host, Willard Jenkins. We're here alternating Fridays, giving two jazz fans the opportunity to compete against each other for a chance to win $100. Each contestant will be asked a question worth 2 points. If they are unable to answer correctly, their opponent will have a chance to steal the question for 1 point. We'll ask 10 questions, and at the end of the 10 questions, the person with the lowest score will get a bonus question for the opportunity to tie the score, no matter how far they're behind in the score. If they're successful, the game will go to sudden death. The person in the lead at the end of regulation will go first in sudden death, and each contestant will take turns trying to answer the sudden death multiple choice question until we have a winner. Let's meet this week's contestants. Our returning and now long-time returning champion for this 73rd episode of Jazzology is Ted Panken. Ted is an American jazz journalist and former history professor who has written extensively for DownBeat, Jazziz, and Jazz Times magazines, as well as for the New York Times, the New York Daily News, and various other publications. Ted Panken has written a staggering amount of liner notes, more than 500 liner notes. For more than 20 years, Ted Panken broadcasted jazz and creative music for stations like WKCR in New York. Ted co-authored My Life in E-Flat, the Autobiography of Phil Woods, for which he earned the 2021 Robert Palmer-Helen Oakley Dance Award for writing from the Jazz Journalists Association, which honored Ted Panken with his Lifetime Achievement Jazz Journalism Award in 2016. Since 2015, Ted Panken has conducted several dozen public interviews in conjunction with the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. Many of his extensive interviews and articles are included in the 220 posts on Ted Panken's blog. It's titled, Today is the Question. Welcome back, Ted.
Thank you, Willard.
Our challenger for this episode is Dave Potter. Following his graduation from Florida State University, Dave Potter was chosen from a national pool of applicants to be a member of the Louis Armstrong Quintet at the University of New Orleans. Unfortunately, the tragedy of Hurricane Katrina temporarily ended his hopes for a career in Louisiana, but soon after, Dave Potter was awarded a full scholarship to the Juilliard School in New York. However, after several days of intense meditation, he declined the offer and returned to Florida State University, where he received his master's degree after further collaboration with his mentor, Marcus Roberts. The drummer is now based in Atlanta, where Dave Potter manages a busy teaching and performing schedule while also touring with the Jason Marsalis Vibes Quartet, Greg Tardy, Eric Reed, and Marcus Roberts, as well as his main project as a leader, Retro Groove. Welcome, Dave Potter.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And that must have been interesting, being a drummer in a drummer's band.
Yes.
Jason Marsalis.
It was very scary. Still is.
I can imagine.
And now let's get to today's Jazzology. And as our previous reigning champion, Ted Panken goes first. You ready, Ted?
Why not?
All right.
Do it.
Ted, vocalist and National Endowment for the Arts jazz master Dee Dee Bridgewater did her undergraduate work at the University of Illinois in their noted jazz studies program. She later credited which New York City institution with providing her invaluable post-grad music training? Would that be A, Columbia University, B, the Henry Street Settlement, C, HARU, short for Harlem Youth Act, D, Jazzmobile, or E, the New School?
Well, that's a good starter, Willard, and that's an interesting question. Dee Dee Bridgewater came to New York in the 70s, mid-70s. Columbia University at the time did have WKCR, an incredible institution of jazz learning and scholarship, but no official program. And the New School didn't have a jazz program until 1986, I think, when Arnie Lawrence established it. The Henry Street settlement goes back a long way. I don't think they had specifically a jazz education program, although I've seen a number of concerts there over the years as a New Yorker. And the Haru Act was established in the 60s, a number of concerts and there, for example, some great Kenny Dorham recordings out of concerts from the 60s that were presented under the auspices of funds from the Haru Act. But I'm going to say Jazzmobile, which is one of the great institutions of New York. Free concerts in the summer and outdoor spaces all over New York City, all the boroughs. And it's been going on more than 50 years. I don't know exactly when it started. So my guess, because I don't know for sure, is going to be D, Jazzmobile.
That is correct. That's correct. After matriculating at Illinois, at the University of Illinois, Dee Bridgewater came to New York, and she credits Jazzmobile.
Willard, I thought you were going to put the Thad Jones Mel Lewis Orchestra in there because she had a lot of experience in there. But there we go.
See, that wasn't a formal school.
Well, Willard, we don't want
I guess because they met every Monday night, maybe you could say that. All right, I hear you, Ted. But the answer was
anyway. We could say,
and you answered correctly. So,
Thank
Dave,
you.
Ted is up 2-0. Time to catch up. Dave Potter, who wrote the tune "4"? Was it A, John Lewis and Dizzy Gillespie? B, Jimmy Heath? C, Miles Davis? D, Bud Powell and Max Roach? Or E, Eddie Cleanhead Vinson?
Okay, so Miles Davis has a history, or had a history, of getting credit for tunes that he did not write, or at least members of his band or other people wrote most of the tune, and then he would kind of come back on the back end and maybe change a little thing here and a little thing there about the tune, and then kind of put his name on it. And
that's kind of typical of the era he came up in.
Yeah, and granted, if I had to gig with Miles Davis, and I wrote a tune, and he said, "Oh, that's a cool tune," I think we might play that in the band, and he ended up putting his name on it, I would probably not say anything either, so I could keep the gig with Miles. So I definitely understand that aspect of it. So just looking through the options, and I know this, if I'm remembering correctly, this is one of those tunes that kind of he may have appropriated from some of his peers and or bandmates.
It's a kind way to put it.
Yeah. So, Bud Powell and Max Roach, I know that, obviously Bud Powell was a prolific composer, and Max Roach, especially with M Boom and some of the things he did later in life, did a composition. But in that period of time, in the 50s, I don't recall much of him coming out as a composer. Jimmy Heath wrote a lot, and he was around Miles and recorded and performed with Miles a lot during that era. And John Lewis and Dizzy Gillespie, obviously John Lewis with Modern Jazz Quartet was also a well-known and respected composer, and of course Dizzy Gillespie. But I don't remember the two of them collaborating on that much. And then Eddie Cleanhead Vincent, again, is in that era of cats, but I'm going to, and that now when we're saying this, are we saying who is credited? Meaning is
No, we're saying who wrote.
Who wrote it? Okay, not
Right.
who's credited. Okay, I'm going to say, and I'm probably going to, I don't know. I'm going to go with B. Jimmy Heath.
That is incorrect, and Ted with an opportunity to steal the point. Ted, who wrote the tune for?
Well, I'll preface that by saying that Jimmy Heath did have a tune appropriated by Miles Davis, The Serpent's Tooth. Master Heath said that was his tune, and Miles took credit for it. Serpent's Tooth was recorded on the famous 1953 session with Sonny Rollins and Charlie Parker on tenor saxophones, which had a number of picturesque stories associated with the flow of that date. And Miles did record Bud Powell's Budo, Hallucinations, and Tempest Fugate, but he didn't. I don't believe he took credit for them. But it's Eddie Cleanhead Vincent wrote for. I don't know the circumstances under which Miles appropriated it or heard it, but Eddie Cleanhead Vincent is the one.
That is correct. 4 was written by Eddie Cleanhead Vincent. All right, Ted, you're up next. Ted, the city of Chicago has a rich jazz history and is also the birthplace of many jazz musicians. Which of the following jazz musicians are not from Chicago? A. Abbey Lincoln. B. Illinois Jacquet. C. Benny Goodman. D. Lenny Tristano. Or E. Earl Hines.
When you say not from Chicago, do you mean not born in Chicago?
That's what I mean.
Well, to my knowledge, 3 of them weren't born in Chicago, and 2 of them were born in Chicago. 3 of them were very associated with Chicago. Abbey Lincoln was born I believe, in a I can't remember the name of the town, but it was in a rural community in Illinois outside of Chicago. And I don't know how much time she spent there because I don't remember. Illinois Jacquet, as far as I know, was born in Louisiana, Western Louisiana. Earl Hines was born in Pittsburgh, but he moved to Chicago in 1923 with a show, and he stayed there for about 25 years, really, until he joined the All-Stars. Benny Goodman was born in Chicago. Lenny Tristano was born in Chicago. Benny Goodman, I think, in 1909, and Lenny Tristano, like 1920. I can't remember, 1920 something, early 20s. So that's a hard question to answer. Since Abbey Lincoln was born in Illinois, and the Benny Goodman and Lenny Tristano and Earl Hines all either were born in Chicago or were associated with it, I'm going to go with Illinois Jacquet.
You're going to go with B?
B, Illinois Jacquet.
There were actually 2 correct answers to that. And that would be B, Illinois Jacquet, or E, Earl Hines. And Earl Hines was not born in Pittsburgh. Earl Hines was born in Duquesne, Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
And Illinois Jacquet was born in Broussard, Louisiana. So you were correct. Illinois Jacquet. Dave, you're up next. Dave, who wrote the soundtrack to the 1966 film Alfie? Would that have been A, Duke Ellington, B, Sonny Rollins, C, Quincy Jones, D, Chico Hamilton, or E, none of the above?
Okay, so continuing series of very good and challenging questions, which I'm probably not going to get right, but that's okay. That's the fun of it, right? So I'm pretty sure that it's not Sonny Rollins or Chico Hamilton, not because they were not capable of doing it, but I don't recall them doing soundtracks in that era. I know Sonny Rollins was doing a lot of trio playing with, more experimental stuff with, the avant-garde during that time. Excuse me 1 second while I call. Sorry about that. And Quincy Jones and Duke Ellington, of the available choices that are not none of the above, I don't recall Duke Ellington's name being attached to that film. Quincy Jones, to me, would seem like the most likely of, if I were going to guess on, and it's crazy because I know this. I've heard of it. I have not seen the movie, but I've heard of the movie, and I know it is attached to a jazz composer, but the name escapes me at the moment. I almost want to say it's none of the above. I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go with E, none of the above, but I'm probably wrong.
Yes,
there you go.
So, Ted, another opportunity to steal the point. Ted, who wrote the soundtrack to the 1966 film? Was it A, Duke Ellington, B, Sonny Rollins, C, Quincy Jones, or D, Chico Hamilton?
Willard, the first time I saw Sonny Rollins play in person at the Village Vanguard back in 1972, I remember I think that was the first night I was there, because I went 5 nights that week, I think. And he played the theme from Alfie. He played about a 25-minute solo on it. Blew my mind. And that was a song he liked to play a lot. And I'm not sure if he actually composed that song within this. No, it was and he wrote the score for Alfie in 1966. And it was an album. Frankie Dunlop on drums. Kenny Burrell was playing, a very, very nice band. And he also had incidental music within the soundtrack of Alfie in 1966. It's interesting because that's also the year that Herbie Hancock did the score for Michelangelo Antonioni's Blow It.
Yeah.
So 66 was an interesting year, which was also set in London. So I don't know what that means, but those things both happened in the same year. But that's Sonny Rollins' only film score, as far as I know, Alfie. So B, Sonny Rollins.
That's correct. That is correct, Ted. So you successfully stolen that point as well. So, Ted, you're up next. Ted, the book titled The Trouble with Cinderella was written by which jazz great? Was The Trouble with Cinderella written by A, Benny Goodman, B, Eddie Condon, C, Stan Getz, D, Doc Cheatham, or E, Artie Shaw?
Okay. In approaching that question, the only 2 of those 5, to my knowledge, wrote either a memoir or, autobiographical fiction. Benny Goodman did not, and Stan Getz did not, although he's had a biography written about him. I shouldn't say that Doc Cheatham didn't, because I don't know whether he did or didn't, but he didn't write it. It wasn't Eddie Condon did not write that one. It's Artie Shaw who wrote fiction. He wrote short fiction, and he also and he wrote The Trouble with Cinderella.
That's correct. Well, Ted Panken is batting 1,000 these days.
I once had an opportunity to interview Artie Shaw twice, and we had a very, very long interview. It was a weird conversation, and the transcripts are on my blog. It's something I can't quite believe we had this sort of conversation that we had.
We'll have to look for that.
It's kind of interesting. Anyway,
our mid-show break, and this week we're spotlighting No Regrets, the music and spirit of Billie Holiday, an in-depth 13-episode radio and live streaming documentary series celebrating Billie Holiday's extraordinary musical legacy. The program explores her early life, groundbreaking singing style, and the powerful impact of Strange Fruit on the civil rights movement. No Regrets is narrated by Rhonda Hamilton. It's produced by award-winning Steve Robinson, and it's written by yours truly. No Regrets is currently up for a Peabody Award. No Regrets features interviews with Angela Davis, Cassandra Wilson, Beth Roars, Andromeda Toure, Phil Schaap, Dan Morgenstern, and many more. All episodes of No Regrets, the music and spirit of Billie Holiday, are available to stream and can be accessed at savagecontent.com. It's time for our weekly question. We'll start with Dave. Dave, tell us, how did you fall in love with jazz?
So I fell in love with jazz after not being interested in jazz at all for pretty much most of my life. I believe because I had been exposed to a lot of smooth jazz and kind of commercial jazz. And so my opinion of jazz was very jaded towards that. It was in high school when I was listening, when I got into music in high school, I started listening to a lot of funk fusion groups like Mahavishnu Orchestra and Chick Corea's Return to Forever and Tony Williams' Lifetime. And through those recordings, I got into Tony's playing with Miles Davis. And at first, I didn't like it, but I didn't understand it. And I was, my arrogance and stubbornness forced me to study it more because I wanted to, I guess, just conquer my my ignorance of it. And through realizing how expansive the music was, the history, there was so many different subgenres within the music and so many different directions that it had gone throughout its history. And then from being a drummer, I love the fact that whereas, when you're playing a lot of other genres, especially of American popular music, there's a specific part that the drums are playing. Whereas when I heard what Tony Williams was doing, he was a fully fledged interactive member of the band, where the decisions that he was making, specifically with the Miles Davis Quintet at that time, had a direct influence on the direction that the music was going. And I just loved that communication aspect of the music.
Well, you've got a new record out, right?
Yes, sir. It's Dave Potter and Retro Groove 2. I did not do a printed release this time because I'm not sure what the, tactile printed future of the music is. It seems to be going in a very digital format. So I'm doing a digital release, but it's available on all the streaming services. This is what the cover looks like. I have a t-shirt here. That's the skyline of Atlanta. And I did print out some nice t-shirts because who doesn't like a good t-shirt? www.davepottermusic.com, but it's also on Amazon and Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, Pandora, all the streaming services is available.
All right, so Dave, thank you for your remembrance or your recall of how you fell in love with jazz. And Ted, you answered that question a long time ago, so I have to ask you, as a radio person for so many years, when you were on the radio, what was your mission, briefly?
My mission was to integrate the past with the present in an accurate way. From the very beginning, from when I was on the radio in Chicago at WHPK on the University of Chicago campus in the 1970s, I interviewed maybe 20 members of the AACM at that time who weren't widely known. Many people who now, are quite well known. This was before they moved to New York. And I was very interested in the history of jazz on the south side of Chicago at that time. So I'd play the music of the time, but I also would do these rather thorough interviews with them. And then when a number of years later, in 1985, when I landed on WKCR, there was a tradition there because of Phil Schaap particularly, but also Billy Banks was there and some other people. But because of Phil Schaap, WKCR had an educational is the wrong word, but a historical component to it. Because in New York City at the time, so many great musicians were living there from all the generations, and it was part of what they did. To differentiate myself from what Phil was doing a little bit, I interviewed people who were playing in town on a given week in whatever show. So let's say, so I might do 3 1-hour interviews within the course of a 3-hour show of 3 different people who were having gigs. I had a chance as the years went on to talk with some of the great historical figures in the music. Sometimes they came in the studio with me for a 5-hour Sunday retrospective of their music, and they would choose everything. A couple of them did 2 in a row or 3. Lee Konitz did 3. Benny Golson did 2. Art Farmer did 2. Ahmad Jamal came up. J.J. Johnson came up. Roy Haynes did a lot of people. A lot of the transcripts from those shows are on my blog. But I also wanted to, people to be apprised of what was going on right then and there in New York. I had one of the shows was more keyed to quote unquote straight ahead jazz, main stem jazz. Within that show, though, there was also room to do more what I call speculative improvising or experimental music. And then there was another body of programming affiliated with their classical music department, which I decided to infiltrate with avant-garde jazz and experimental jazz. So for example, I did 2 or 3 in-studio long interviews with Anthony Braxton or George Lewis or Roscoe Mitchell or John Zorn and things like that. So that's what I did.
You were all about the classic and the contemporary.
The whole spectrum. I see it all as a continuum.
Well, I can certainly relate to that because that's my mission as well, as the classic and the contemporary.
Well, you did that with the great maestro Randy Weston.
And on the contemporary side, our record of the week is this particular recording. It's the latest release from alto saxophonist Sherelle Cassidy. It's called Gratitude on the Sunnyside label, with a stellar cast of musicians including Professor Cyrus Chestnut on piano, Christian McBride on bass, Louis Nash on drums, and Sherelle Cassidy adds Michael Dees on trombone and Terrell Stafford on trumpet on a couple of tracks. Again, it's the latest from alto saxophonist Sherelle Cassidy, and it's titled Gratitude on the Sunnyside label. All right, so it's time to get back to our questions, our Jazzology for the week. And Dave is up first. Dave, Which of the following trumpet players was never a member of Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers bands? Would that have been A, Donald Byrd, B, Bill Hardman, C, Chuck Mangione, D, Valerie Ponomarev, or E, Art Farmer?
All right, so I'm happy that I have a better chance on this one than I feel like I've had on the previous ones. So I'm just gonna start giving how my brain is working now. So I know Chuck Mangione was in the Messengers on that. I think it was like Buttercorn was the name of the record.
Buttercorn Lady.
Buttercorn Lady. And I remember, when I got introduced to the music, what I knew of Chuck Mangione was, Feels So Good. So when I, finally figured out that he was a jazz messenger, that kind of blew my mind. And I know that Valerie Ponomarev was definitely in the Jazz Messengers. So those two, I know it's that immediately removes those two. Art Farmer, had the Jazz Tet around that same era, and Donald Byrd, I feel like he was, that's again, a great, as all of these questions are very great because, so many cats, I guess from the mid 50s up until Art Blakey's passing, and he died in 90, were members of the Jazz Messengers alumni. So there's so many kind of cats that came through that, on the Bandstand University. Bill Hardman. My gut is telling me that it's either going to be Bill Hardman or Art Farmer, because I can't think of the record. I'm almost positive that Donald Byrd played on at least one of those Blakey records, either in the late 1950s or early 1960s, when they were going back and forth between Lee Morgan and Freddie Hubbard. I feel like he might have done one of those. Again, I'm gonna probably get this wrong, but let's say E, Art Farmer.
That is correct. And for those who don't know him, Bill Hardman, who's from Cleveland, Ohio, I'm proud to say, Bill Hardman was actually, I think, Ted can correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't he the trumpet player that just preceded Wynton in the band?
No, I believe that was Valerie.
Oh, yeah, Valerie Ponomarev, yes.
So Hardman was in the late 60s.
He preceded Valerie Ponomarev, yes.
Eddie Henderson was in there, too. There were a number of... Olu Dara played with the Messengers.
Yeah, I know he did for a short time, yes.
There's a video on YouTube.
That's correct. Art Farmer was never a member of the Jazz Messengers. So, Ted, you're up next. Ted, the tune titled Miss Anne was contributed by which of the following jazz greats? Would that have been A, Eric Dolphy, B, Thelonious Monk, C, Earl Hines, D, Benny Golson, or E, none of the above?
Well, that leads me to observe that all four of those musicians wrote wonderful songs dedicated to women, like Benny Golson's Along Came Betty, with that, that sort of strutting march tune with the Messengers, as well as some others as well. Earl Hines' Rosetta, one of his most famous tunes with the big band. Thelonious Monk, Ruby My Dear, Crepuscule with Nellie for his wife, Jackieing for his niece Jackie Beaner. But But none of them wrote Miss Anne. Eric Dolphy did, and he debuted around 1960 or 61. So A, Eric Dolphy.
That's correct. And you know, I stand correct because I had always thought that Jacking was about Jackie McLean.
Oh, me too.
She was my next door neighbor for many years. We got to know each other fairly well.
All right. Well, it's
and
time.
The song is just like her.
All right.
He really nailed her.
All right. So it's time for a bit of Name That Birthplace. And we'll start with Dave. Dave, the saxophonist and flutist, Jane Bennett, is a native of what Canadian city? Is Jane Bennett from A, Vancouver, B, Ottawa, C, Toronto, D, Montreal, or E, Hamilton?
So I did know that she was from Canada. I don't recall her being associated, although it's one of my favorite cities in the world, and one that I think has maybe the best weather of anywhere I've ever traveled to, Vancouver, but I don't recall her being from Vancouver or the French Canadian city of Montreal, nor Hamilton. I feel like it is going to be Toronto, but there's an off chance that it could be Ottawa. But I feel like one of the times I played at the IJE festival in Toronto years ago, that she was, they would definitely spotlight her because she's Canadian, but I feel like it's going to be, I will go with C, Toronto.
And you are correct. Jane Bennett is from Toronto, Ontario. So, continuing in the Name That Birthplace category, Ted, the pianist Matthew Shipp was born in what American city? Was Matthew Shipp born in A, Baltimore, B, Cleveland, C, Wilmington, D, Pontiac, or E, Washington, D.C.?
I don't know how much thought process to do this. I know the answer, but I don't know how to where to go with explaining my thought process.
Well, just come on out with it.
What the hell? Wilmington, birthplace of Lem Winchester, the vibraphonist, and Clifford Brown, I think.
Yes, indeed. And also the birthplace of my friend and jazz journalist Eugene Holly Jr. as well, Wilmington, Delaware. So, Dave.
Yes, sir.
The last of our Name That Birthplace questions. Dave, the great ancestor Chick Corea was born in what New England town? Was Chick Corea born in A, Boston, B, Hartford, C, Chelsea, D, Portland, or E, none of the above?
Okay, hopefully I don't make a fool out of myself, but I'm pretty sure, like Ted, I just know the answer to this kind of intuitively because I've always known that he was from this city, and of course, he definitely has an accent of the people of this city. So I'm going to go with A for Boston. He's not from Boston.
Incorrect.
Oh.
Ted has an opportunity to steal the point. Ted, the great ancestor Chick Corea was born in what New England town? Was Chick Corea born in B, Hartford, C, Chelsea, D, Portland, or E, none of the above?
I have to ask you a question. I don't know if you can tell me, but Chelsea, what? There's more than one Chelsea in New England. Is this Chelsea? There's a Chelsea that's a
Chelsea
neighborhood
to as Massachusetts.
Then he must have been born in Chelsea as a separate municipality outside of Boston, because he certainly came up on the Boston scene. So I'm going to say C, Chelsea.
That's correct. Chick Corea was born in Chelsea, Massachusetts.
It's sort of like when I said Pittsburgh, but Earl Hines was from Duquesne, which was near Pittsburgh, that sort of thing.
So Ted has a commanding lead, Dave, but you have a chance to catch up by responding correctly to our bonus question. Are you ready?
Yeah.
And this is within your instrument. Drummer and educator Carl Allen is currently, and I emphasize currently, a professor of music at which of the following institutions? Is Carl Allen an educator at A, the Juilliard School, B, the Manhattan School of Music, C, the University of Missouri in Kansas City, D, Norfolk State University, or E, Peabody Conservatory?
Okay, so I feel bad. I do know the answer to this one. I'm about 99% sure. I feel bad that this is going to allow me to catch up because Mr. Panken has thoroughly dismantled me throughout this entire process. But I've learned a lot, so I've loved being in the process. But that would be C, University of Missouri, Kansas City.
That is correct. And you have scored the grand slam, Dave, because you have caught up. Now we go to sudden death, and Ted goes first in sudden death. Ted, which of the following musician and writer pair wrote the musical narrative Scenes in the City? Would that have been A, Charles Mingus and Lonnie Elder, B, Randy Weston and Langston Hughes, C, Branford Marsalis and Stanley Crouch, or D, Max Roach and James Baldwin, or E, none of the above?
Well, okay. The thought of Branford and Stanley writing that is pretty funny, actually, for C. So we'll eliminate that one. Max Roach and James Baldwin would have been an interesting collaboration, actually. But that would have been something else, but no, not them. So as I remember Scenes of the City, which it's a recording by Mingus, but somehow or other, I'm thinking of Langston Hughes as the person who wrote the book or the text for Scenes of the City, although I can't be positive of it. And I don't recall a music and text collaboration between Randy Weston and Langston Hughes.
Oh, yes, there was one.
Thank you. I have to go back to the book, go back to the bio. But it wasn't scenes from the city, because the music is Mingus's. So let me just toss in my paradigm here, and if I'm wrong, I'm giving Dave the answer. Charles Mingus and Lonnie Elder, or none of the above. But since it was Mingus, and I don't think you would throw a misdirection on the writer of the text, Willard. I'm going to go with A, Mingus and Lonnie Elder.
That is correct. Mingus and Lonnie Elder.
That was a good one, Willard.
But to back up, yes, Randy Weston and Langston Hughes collaborated on Randy's 1959 recording, Uhuru Africa. Langston Hughes wrote the text for that. So congratulations, Ted Panken, on winning our 73rd episode of Jazzology.
Thank you, Willard.
We encourage everyone to try your hand and play Jazzology. And if anyone watching would like to become a contestant on Jazzology, simply click the link below and simply fill out the form. You must be 18 years old or older, and be sure to follow us on social media at Jazzology Trivia Show to get all the latest news and updates. Thank you so much, Dave Potter and Ted Panken, and to everyone who joined us for our 73rd episode of Jazzology today. Remember, you can check out Jazzology every other Friday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you missed the show live, you can find the archive on the Savage Content YouTube channel. Thank you both.
Thank you, Willard. And thank you, Dave Potter. It was great to meet you.
Thank you, Ted Panken. It was great to be beaten down by you.
Was it a beatdown? It's nerdology on my part. That's what it is.